In this LORWYN Eclipsed draft guide, I will be providing you with all of the information you need to know before diving into the format. I will be discussing the set mechanics, the top commons for each color, I will provide archetype overviews, go through the combat tricks you need to be aware of, traps to avoid, combos you can assemble, and more. Kicking things off with the set mechanics, they are Vivid, Blight, Convoke, and Changeling. Vivid is a pretty straightforward mechanic. It cares about the number of colors among permanents you control. So in the case of Luminolosk, when it enters, you gain life equal to the number of colors among permanents you control. Pretty straightforward. Next is Blight. This is a mechanic that puts -1/-1 counters onto your own creatures. So in the case of Chaos Spewer, when it enters, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you don't, Blight 2. And so you would put 2 -1/-1 counters onto a creature you control. Importantly, you don't actually have to have as much stats as the Blight. So if you have a 1/1 token, you can still target it with Blight 2. It will simply overkill that creature. So Chaos Spear, you can either get a really cheap 5/4, but have to Blight 2, or you can pay 5 mana to get a 5/4. So that's kind of how this works. It's a mechanic that's going to give you some downside with the Blight, but also some upside in return. Next is Convoke. This is a mechanic that lets your creatures help cast your spells. So each creature you tap while convoking pays for 1 generic mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. So Unexpected Assistance can cost you 3 blue, but if you have some creatures in play, you can tap them to make it cost less mana at the cost of tapping some of your creatures. And the final mechanic is Changeling. The Changeling mechanic just makes the card every creature type in every zone. So if Feisty Spikeling's in play, it's going to count as every creature type. If it's in your graveyard or your hand, it's going to count as every creature type. And so if you have a card that, for example, cares about you having a Merfolk in your hand, then the Feisty Spikeling will be that. If you care about having an elf in your graveyard, the Feisty Spikeling will be that. And so the Changeling is just every creature type in every zone, which is going to be pretty relevant for some of the cards that care about having certain types of creatures in this set. Moving on to the top commons and kicking things off with white at number 1 is Spiral into Solitude. For 2 mana, you get a nice little removal spell that stops a creature from attacking or blocking, and then you can spend 2 more mana, Blight 1, sacrifice it to exile the enchanted creature. So turning your potentially temporary removal spell into a permanent removal spell that exiles the creature is really, really nice. Blight 1 is going to be relatively easy to enable on this card as well because you can do it at instant speed. So if your opponent's trying to kill one of your creatures, you can just Blight 1 in response with your Spiral into Solitude, and so the creature that was going to die anyway just dies with an extra -1/-1 counter on it. You can do something like Chump Block, then use the Spiral into Solitude, or if you just have like some sort of trade that was already going to happen, like you have a 4/2, your opponent has a 3/3, they're trading in combat, you just put an extra counter onto your 4/2 to exile something permanently. It's a nice little ability to have, and it's an efficient removal spell. Next is Gold Meadow Nomad. It's a 1 mana 1/2, and it has white. Exile this card from your graveyard. You create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. This card just does a lot of little things very, very well. For starters, it's a card that can chip in for a couple points of damage in the early turns, but more importantly, you can use this to convoke cards a lot earlier than maybe you would have, because sometimes you might not have a 1-drop to play. So you play this on turn 1, then any convoke cards you have, this can tap to add a mana to help cast them. It's a Kithkin for decks that care about having Kithkins, especially because it can come down early to be a nice little enabler for your Kithkin synergies. And it's also going to be pretty nice to put Blight counters on it, because if it dies, you can just bring it back and then put Blight counters onto the new 1/1. It's pretty nice for that as well. And if you have maybe a way to discard it from your hand, or you mill it over from some self-mill cards, then you can use that ability from the graveyard as well. So just a lot of little synergies with the card that makes it one you're going to be happy to have. And then at number 3 is Liminal Hold. 4 mana, when it enters, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and then you gain until it leaves the battlefield, and then you gain 2 life. So a little bit inefficient at 4 mana, but it's offset a little bit by the fact that you gain 2 life, and especially in the late game, you're going to be happy to have answers to your opponent's cards. Moving on to blue, at number 1 is Blossom Bind. For 2 mana, you get an aura that enchants a creature. When it enters, you tap the creature, and then the enchanted creature can't become untapped, and importantly, can't have counters put on it. So the creature is not going to be able to be untapped, even if your opponent has some sort of way to untap their creatures. And also, they can't just stack Blight counters on it because it can't have counters put on it. So that's a couple of the downsides of the card immediately removed. It's a really efficient removal spell for blue to gain access to, and even though there are some downsides, like if your opponent has a bounce spell to bounce the card back to their hand, that's going to be offset in many ways by the fact that it's a really efficient removal spell, and blue doesn't often get that, and this card's going to be pretty great. Next is Temporal Cleansing. For 3 and a blue, you get a sorcery that says the owner of target non-land permanent puts it into their library second from the top or bottom, but it also has Convoke, so your creatures can help cast this, which does make it a lot better. One important thing to mention about Convoke is that your creatures don't have to have the ability to attack. You can use summoning sick creatures to help you use Convoke. So if you have Temporal Cleansing, maybe on turn 5, you can go like cast a 2-drop, immediately tap that 2-drop, and 3 other mana to use your temporal cleansing, things like that. It slots into your curve relatively flexibly because of the convocability, and it's nice to have interaction that can be cast for relatively cheap. And then at number 3 is Summit Sentinel. 2 mana for a 1/3 is not the best stats, but when it dies, you draw a card. So if you ever trade this for one of your opponent's creatures, you come out ahead in cards in the exchange, which is quite nice. And as a 1/3, it also does hold blight counters pretty well, especially because oftentimes you want this to die because you want to get that card back out of it, especially in maybe the mid game. Once it's kind of stalled out your opponent's aggression, you want to be able to like have this card die, draw a card, start finding your late game cards. And if you just start stacking blight counters onto this, that can really help do that. So it's a nice little 2-drop for blue. It's kind of like just a little bit of a dorky guy, but drawing a card when it dies makes a big difference. And then moving on to black, at number 1 is Bog Slither's Embrace. For 2 mana, you get a sorcery, and then as an additional cost to cast it, you either blight 1 or pay 3 and you exile target creature. So in the late game, you're happy to pay 5 to exile a creature, and if you ever want to have like maybe a super efficient turn, or you just don't have access to 5 mana quite yet, then you can blight 1 to be able to exile any creature for just 2 mana. That's a pretty good rate. And the fact that there are plenty of cards to put those counters onto, and some cards that actively want to have -1/-1 counters on them that we'll cover a little bit later, Bog Slither's Embrace does quite a good bit of work and just costs 2 mana to do that. Next up is Blight Rot. For 3 mana, you put 4 -1/-1 counters on target creature at instant speed, which is quite nice. Even if this doesn't kill a creature, which it often will, it's going to significantly reduce the threat level of a creature if it doesn't kill it, and you can use this during combat as like a sort of combat trick of sorts. If you do have a bigger creature you want to deal with, like they attack you with their 6/6, you put 4 counters on it, block it with a 3/3, something like that. And oftentimes being able to just put 4 counters is going to kill the creatures you care about doing, and it just costs a single black pip, easy to cast, instant speed, great removal spell. Then at number 3 is Scarblade Scout. For 2 mana, you get a 2/2 lifelink, and when it enters, you mill 2 cards. So it's going to be a nice little card that aggressive decks really don't want to see. It helps you in racing situations, and it even mills you 2 cards to help fuel graveyard synergies, which is especially relevant for the green-black elves deck, which we will cover later. Moving on to red, at number 1 is Tweeze. For 2 and a red, you get an instant. Tweeze deals 3 damage to any target. You may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So 3 mana for this sort of 3 is a little bit behind rate, but the fact that you then get to discard a card and draw a card is really, really good. It means in the late game situations, you're going to oftentimes have an extra land in your hand. You can use your Tweeze and basically draw a card, because once you don't need extra lands, discarding a land to draw a new card is really, really good. Sometimes, though, you might need lands, so you can discard a spell to try to dig towards your 4th land if you really need that. It's instant speed, and importantly, it can deal damage to any target. So if you get your opponent down to 3 life, any top deck Tweeze can just go straight towards your opponent, and that's really good to have access to on a removal spell. And number 2 is Cinder Strike. So it's 1 red mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you may blight 1. It deals 2 damage to target creature, but if you blight 1, it deals 4 damage to that creature instead. So you can either kill something small, or sometimes you can kill something that costs maybe even 4 mana from your opponent or something like that for just 1 red mana, which is absolutely fantastic. Blight 1 isn't always the best thing to do, but as I already mentioned, there are some cards that can mitigate the downside of Blight 1 or even want to have the counters put on them, and so this can be a nice little synergy piece for those. But the potential to have a 1 mana deal for is just really, really strong. You can really just like slot this into your curve well, and just doing 1 mana deal 2 can also be just what you're looking for as well. Then at number 3 is Elder Auntie. 2 and a red for a 2/2. Not the greatest rate, but when it enters, you get a 1/1 black and red creature token. So it does a lot of things that you want to do. First of all, it's going to give you 2 bodies for 1 card, so it's pretty good on blocks because you can like put the 2/2 in front of one thing, the 1/1 in front of another thing. It gives you a 1/1 that you don't really mind blighting away because you're still going to be left with that 2/2. So if you have some blight cards, you can use that way. It's a goblin for the decks that care about you having a goblin. It's overall just going to do a lot of the things that you care about in this set, and it's going to be a pretty good 3-drop that you're happy to have. And finally, we have green. At number 1 is Assert Perfection. So it's 2 mana. The target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. It's sorcery speed, so you have to be a little bit careful of your opponent like interacting with this, because if they kill your creature in response, you won't get to use the Assert Perfection. But this is the sort of removal spells green gains access to, and green does need to have interaction, and it's going to need to be able to kill its opponent's creatures. And so this is the sort of thing you're still going to have to take and play. And the +1/+0 does help you push through extra damage. It's pretty efficient at 2 mana. Definitely a nice card. And number 2 is Mist Meadow Council. It's 4 and a green, so 5 mana for a 4/3. When it enters, you draw a card, and it costs 1 less to cast if you control a Kithkin. So importantly, you don't necessarily have to be a Kithkin deck for this to work, because there are changelings and there are some Kithkin that you might want to play. even outside of a dedicated Kithkin deck. Though obviously if you're playing a 4-mana 4/3 draw card, that is going to be a lot better than a 5-mana 4/3 draw card. Still, a big creature like 4/3 is relatively sizable stats. Your opponent is going to have to deal with it. They can't just ignore it. It's sizable stats. It replaces itself. It's going to pretty much always get you a 2-for-1, and that's pretty great on a just solid green common like creature. So Mist Meadow Cancel is great, especially if you're in a Kithkin deck or have a lot of changelings or things like that. And then at number 3 is Safe Right Cavalry. So 4 mana for a 4/4, so pretty reasonable stats. This creature can't be blocked by more than one creature. That's pretty substantial when you have a 4/4 creature. There's not a lot of things that are bigger than a 4/4 creature. And 5 mana, target elf you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So this is an elf. There's plenty of other elves, and there's also changelings, as we mentioned. So this thing is pretty much impossible to block. It also makes it like even harder to block once you get access to 5 mana, because there's not a lot of creatures that can block a 6/6 individually and take it down in combat. And it can even buff your other elves to make it even harder for your opponent to block those. So you play this on turn 4. If you're like on the front foot and attacking your opponent and you're hitting them with a 4/4 that basically can't be blocked every turn, that's pretty substantial, because this, like, they have to chump block it at a certain point. It makes it really like difficult to deal with your other elves by giving them potentially +2/+2. And the thing about that ability is it's the threat of activation more so than the actual activation that makes it good, because you attack your opponent with a 3/3 elf and this, your opponent can't really block this unless they have a 4/4 of their own. And if they want to block their 3/3 elf, then they know that you could activate the +2/+2. So you don't even have to activate the +2/+2. You just need to have access to the 5 mana. So threat of activation does a lot for this card, making it a pretty scary threat to see when your opponent is playing it, or when you're happy to see when you're playing it. Moving on to the archetypes, kicking things off with green-white. There are 5 archetypes here that are in this set that are kind of more like obviously supported with the like multicolored gold cards and things like that, and be like creature type archetypes. So Kithkin is one of those. And then there's 5 archetypes that don't have like a gold card associated with them, but are thematically connected. So we'll be covering all 10 of the archetypes, but just keep that in mind. If you don't see like the multicolored gold card, it doesn't mean that it just might mean that it doesn't exist for the archetype that you're looking at. So Kithkin is a deck that's built around getting a bunch of creatures into play, specifically Kithkin. So Thoughtweft Lieutenant, 2 mana for a 2/2, Kithkin Soldier. When this creature or another Kithkin you control enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So buffing your creatures, giving them trample, especially when you're putting multiple creatures into play for one card, with something like Klakan Festival. So 2 and a white, it's a Kindred Enchantment Kithkin, and so Kindred Enchantment means that it counts as a Kithkin. So if you have something like Thoughtweft Lieutenant, when this creature or another Kithkin you control enters, the Klakan Festival will count as a Kithkin for that. If you have to have a Kithkin card in your hand for some reason, then Klakan Festival will count for that as well. So when it enters, you create 2 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature tokens. So like two Kithkin creatures and then a Kithkin enchantment coming into play all at once, and you can spend 5 mana to create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. So keep those tokens flowing, keep your synergies flowing, and just overwhelm your opponent with one card. Really nice tool for this deck. And then Eclipsed Kithkin, you can cast this outside of a dedicated Kithkin deck because it does use hybrid mana, but it's much better in a Kithkin deck. 2 mana 2/1, really easy to cast with hybrid mana for a green-white deck. And then you look at the top 4, reveal a Kithkin, Forest, or Plains. From among them, put it into your hand, the rest on the bottom in a random order. So a nice support piece for this deck. Next is Blue-Red, which is an Elementals deck. So it just cares about playing Elementals. There's a couple of cards that synergize with casting cards that cast 4 or more mana, but generally you're just playing good Elementals, have a good curve of creatures, good Blue-Red stuff. You get access to Twin Flame Travelers, so it's 4 mana for a 3/3. Flyer, if a triggered ability of another elemental you control triggers, it triggers an additional time. So nice little flyer that can potentially really synergize with your elementals, like Rhymekin Recluse. Now this card is just absolutely stellar. Every blue deck's going to want it, but it's especially good if you're like doubling its trigger with a Twin Flame Travelers. It's a 3 mana 3/2. When it enters, you return up to 1 other target creature to its owner's hand. That's just going to be fantastic. You're going to love having this one. And then Eclipsed Flamekin, similarly hybrid mana, so you don't have to cast it in just an elementals deck, but a great support piece. Helps you find your elementals or your islands or your mountains for just 3 mana, and it'll give you a 1/4 out of the deal too. Next is Black-Green, which is an Elves strategy. We already mentioned Elves can sometimes care about the graveyard in this set, and this deck certainly does. Morkant's Loyalist is great. It's a 3 mana 3/2. Other elves you control get +1/+1. When it dies, you return another elf from your graveyard to your hand. So if you are milling yourself a little bit and you have more access to selection, that's going to be pretty nice. Getting back an elf that's pretty good back to your hand. Morkant's Eyes can be pretty good. You play it early, it starts surveilling, so you're filling your graveyard with elves or just finding what you need, find your removal spells, find your good cards. And then in the late game, you spend 6 mana, sacrifice it to create X 2/2 black and green elf creature tokens, where X is the number of elf cards in your graveyard. So if you have a bunch of elves in your deck and you can make like 5 tokens with this in the late game, you're going to be really, really happy. So make sure you have enough self-mill and enough elves before you considering concluding a card like Morkant's Eyes. but if you have the synergy, it can do some pretty cool things. And then Eclipsed Elf, another support piece. Once you get to like triple hybrid mana, it is pretty hard to cast this outside of a dedicated like green-black deck, or if you, I guess, were playing mono-black or mono-green, you could still include Eclipsed Elf. But again, look at the top 4, you get an elf, swamp, or forest from among them, put into your hand. That's pretty great. You're not going to miss very often with these sorts of cards when you're looking at the top 4, and you can get one of your basic land types or one of your main creature types. So 3/2, pretty nice stats as well, while getting some card advantage. Next up is White-Blue, which is a Merfolk deck. So you gain access to Deep Channel Duelist. It's 2 mana for a 2/2, but other Merfolk you control get +1/+1 at the beginning of your end step, untap target Merfolk you control. So giving something kind of pseudo-vigilance, or like there's a lot of tap-untap shenanigans with Merfolk because there's a lot of Convoke cards in this color. So keep an eye out for Convoke cards and cards that care about being tapped in this deck, but buffing up all your Merfolk is great, especially with a card like Silver Gill Mentor. So this is one of those cards that cares about having a certain creature type because it has Behold a Merfolk or pay 2 when it comes, like when you cast it. So as an additional cost, you can Behold a Merfolk or pay 2. So you Behold a Merfolk by choosing a Merfolk you control, or reveal a Merfolk card from your hand. So if you're casting this on turn 2, you'll need another Merfolk or a Changeling in your hand, but if you already have a Merfolk in play, you can just pay this for 2 mana. When it enters, you get a 1/1 white and blue Merfolk creature token, which is perfect because not only does it give you a couple of Merfolk, which works well with Deep Channel Duelist or things that care about Merfolk, but also gives you multiple bodies with which to convoke, and there's lots of convoke cards. And then you gain access to another support piece, Eclipsed Marrow, 3 mana, 2/3, top 4 cards, Merfolk, Plains, Island, one of those options. It's pretty nice to have access to these sorts of cards to help support these strategies. And then the final, like, kind of 2-color, like Kindred archetype is Goblins. So you gain access to Boggart Cursecrafter, 2 mana, 2/3, Death Touch. When another goblin you control dies, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So pretty nice card there. You get Boggart Mischief, which is a Kindred enchantment once again, so it does count as a goblin when it's in your hand or something like that. When it enters, you may blight 1. If you do, create 2 1/1 black and red goblin creature tokens. And whenever a goblin you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So another little like synergy with your goblins dying. If you have like a 1/1 goblin in play, you play this, kill off the 1/1 goblin, drain your opponent for 1, make 2 more goblins that can then die off and drain your opponent for 1 each. If you have a Boggart Cursecrafter in play, then they'll deal an extra damage to your opponent. Just not lots of nice little synergies as well. Then you get your Eclipsed Boggart, 3 mana. Again, the hybrid mana, you can look at the top 4 for a goblin, swamp, or mountain card. So with an example for Kindred, if you use the Eclipsed Boggart, you could grab the Boggart Mischief because it is a goblin using your Eclipsed Boggart. So that's kind of how Kindred would work if it was in your deck or something like that. But again, really nice little value play. You get some selection there. Oftentimes you're going to be able to have a choice between whether you want a land or a goblin. It's just nice to have for your 3-drop. Moving on to the kind of the thematic archetypes, because there's those ones that have like the multicolored gold cards, but there are still, you still can draft blue, green, red, green, all of these things moving forward. Blue, green is a deck that cares about the vivid mechanic. It's like a multicolor deck. So you see there's not a multicolored gold card to really look at. There is a multicolored hybrid card, but a card like Shine Striker is the sort of thing you're looking for in your blue, green deck. It's a 3/3 flyer for 6 mana, and when it enters, you draw cards equal to the number of colors among permanents you control. So you often want to either splash or like have some extra ways to get your cards multiple colors. And when you do that, you want your Shine Striker to come into play and draw you like 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 cards if you're building like a big multicolor deck. How can you do that? Well, Shine Striker, how can you do that? Shimmerwild's growth really helps with that. If you have like this thing, it enters a land, you choose a color, the enchanted land is the chosen color. So normally lands are colorless. This will make the land into the chosen color. So if you're playing a blue-green deck, you could maybe name red or something like that. All of a sudden you have a red permanent for when you play your Shine Striker, and when it's tapped for mana, you add an additional 1 mana of the chosen color. So if you're splashing, it's really, really helpful for that. And then a card like Glister Baron is a nice top end card. It's a 5 mana 1/4, so not the greatest defensive stats, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, another creature you control gets +X/+X, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. So it's 2 colors by itself. Giving something +2/+2 isn't what you're aspiring towards here, though you want to be giving something like +3/+3, +4/+4, maybe even +5/+5, and then it's a really formidable card, because if you're giving something +5/+5, all of a sudden this thing's attacking as like a 6/9. I mean, it's pretty hard to deal with that sort of thing, or just any other creature you can. So you want to get a lot of colors into your deck for this sort of strategy, and there are plenty of tools and fixing to help you do that, which we'll cover a little bit later. Next is Red-Green, which is also a deck that cares about the vivid mechanic, though a little bit more aggressively slanted. A card like Squawk Roaster fits nicely here. It's 4 mana for a star for double strike. Its power is equal to the number of colors among permanents you control. So a 4 mana, if you're playing like just straight up red-green, it could be a 4 mana 2/4 double strike, which is basically like a 4 mana 4/4 double strike. Can do some good stuff with combat tricks, still a solid card, but if you can get to like 4 or 5 colors, you can just absolutely decimate your opponent with just your Squawk Roaster, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. Definitely look for these more aggressively slanted vivid cards. Prisma Basher is also a great card for this sort of deck. 6 mana, 6/6 trample. When it enters, up to X target creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. So if you have like 2 colors, +2/+2 for a couple of creatures, pretty solid, but +3/+3 for 3 creatures, +4/+4 for 4 creatures. This card really scales well aggressively if you have a lot of colors. And then Noggle Robber is a really nice card here for this sort of deck. 3 mana for a 3/3. When it enters or dies, you get a treasure token, and the treasure token can help you splash into other colors, get those other colored permanents into play. That's going to be a nice little thing to have access to for your 3-drop. Next up is white-black. So the theme of white-black is -1/-1 counters and like removing them for value. So Reaping Willow, it's 1 white-black, white-black, white-black. So it's got this hybrid mana going, but you get a 3/6 lifelink Treefolk Cleric. It enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it. So it's not a 4 mana 3/6, it's a 4 mana 1/4. But you can spend 1 and then 1 black or white hybrid, remove 2 counters from the creature to return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can only activate that as a sorcery. So you can remove those counters. All of a sudden, you do have a 3/6 lifelinker, and all of a sudden, you've gotten back an extra resource from your graveyard. So you kind of want to keep putting -1/-1 counters onto your Reaping Willow, so you can keep removing them to get value, which is pretty cool. There's similar cards like Moonlit Lamenter, 3 mana 2/5. It enters with a -1 counter. Then you can spend 2 mana to remove a counter to draw a card. So you want to keep putting counters on that one, so you can remove them to draw a card. So as I mentioned earlier, there are cards that care about having -1 counters put on them. So all of those cards that like Blight 1 are actually going to provide you with upside if you have something like Moonlit Lamenter in play. And something like Gnarlbark Elm can remove 2 counters as well. It enters with 2 -1 counters. You spend 3 to remove 2 counters to give a creature -2/-2 until end of turn. So that's a nice use for putting like, you kill a creature, then put more counters on this, kill another creature. It's a nice little tool to have access to. 3 mana 3/4, so it comes in as a 1/2, but you remove the counter, you've got a 3/4, which is pretty nice. White-red also has a -1/-1 counter theme. It's trying to use it more aggressively generally, though. A lot of those cards we looked at were kind of value-oriented. You can kind of do the similar things because a lot of the white cards overlap, but you're trying to be more aggressively slanted in red-white as an aggressive strategy. Those color combos is generally just more aggressive. Hovel Hurler is a fantastic top-end card for this deck. 5 mana for a 6/7. Its creature enters with 2 -1 counters on it, though, so it's really like a 4/5. But then you can spend 2 mana to remove a counter from it. Another target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. And then again, activate only as a sorcery. So you spend 5 mana, you get a 4/5. Next turn, you just spend 4 mana, remove 2 counters, buff up 2 of your things, attack them with a 6/7 and 2 flyers. You're going to end the game a lot of the time when you do that. This card's absolutely fantastic for this strategy. And if you have any other cards that put -1 counters on it and you somehow haven't already won the game, you can put them on this, remove them for value, which is really, really nice. Stingslinger is the exact sort of card that can put -1 counters on your creatures for value. It's a 3 mana 3/3, decent stats. Then you spend 2 mana, Blight 1, tap it. This creature deals 2 damage to each opponent. So you're dealing extra damage to your opponent, putting Blight counters onto your own creatures. Sometimes that's going to be for upside. Sometimes it's going to be because you don't have any attacks enabled, but generally going to be nice to have access to some extra reach in the late game to help finish off your opponents. And then Burdened Stoneback is a nice one as well. 2 mana 4/4, but it enters with 2 counters. So it's like a 2/2. And then you can remove a counter for 2 mana, and the target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. So it can target itself. So if you do this, then you can hit them like with a 3/3 indestructible. Oftentimes you won't want to do this in the early turns because you want to be deploying your creatures and things like that, but it's definitely like a nice card to have access to. Again, you can put extra -1 counters on them if it runs out, and it's just important to remember this is only used as a sorcery, so you can't use this to protect from removal. Next is blue-black, the final archetype. It cares about casting spells during your opponent's turn, so it's like a control deck. It has a couple of fairy cards in it, but generally just cares about casting cards on your opponent's turn. So you have Voracious Tome Skimmer, hard to cast outside of a blue-black deck because it's triple hybrid mana. It's 3 mana for a 2/3 flyer. When you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, you may pay 1 life. If you do, draw a card. So just going to get you a lot of value if you're casting spells during your opponent's turn. You get Unwelcome Sprite, 2 mana 2/1 flyer, already a solid rate. When you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, Surveil 2. Surveil 2, when you don't need more lands, like in the late game, is really, really good, especially like it's almost like drawing a card at that point, because any land you surveil away is almost like you drew a card, but still just really good in the early turns as well as a 2/1 flyer that can also help set up your draws. And then Nightmare Sower, 4 mana 2/3 flying lifelink. When you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, put a counter onto up to 1 target creature. So generally going to be able to finish off your opponent's creatures using that. Make sure their small creatures can't flood the board or maybe just shrink down their bigger ones. So nice little 4-drop as well. And then you just want to put a bunch of instant speed cards into your deck so that you can cast and trigger all of these cards and get some good effects. Moving on to some combat tricks to be aware of. These are the common and uncommon combat tricks in the set so that you don't get blown out. If your opponent makes a weird attack, keep these ones in mind. In white, there's River Guard's Reflexes and Appeal to Eridu. So 2 mana for +2/+2 and first strike. It also untaps the creature, so they might be trying to ambush you on your turn. There's also Appeal to Eridu. Up to 1 or 2 target creatures each get +2/+1 until end of turn, and it has Convoke. So keep those ones in mind if your opponent is playing white. Blue gains access to Aquatect's defenses, so +1/+2 and hexproof until end of turn, and it's an enchantment, so it sticks around. So you really don't want to get blown out by this one because it's a permanent buff. Glamour Gifter is going to be 2 mana for a 1/2 flash flyer. When it enters up to 1 to other target creature, it gets base power and toughness 4/4 and all creature types. So it's going to be able to turn something into a 4/4 base. Definitely keep that one in mind as well if your opponent is being sneaky and looks a little suspicious with their attacks. Next is Reckless Ransacking. So 2 mana, target creature gets +3/+2 until end of turn, and you create a treasure token. So if your opponent has an attack in a red deck, +3/+2 is the card that should come to mind. The treasure token can definitely be useful for those decks as well. So you don't want to get blown out by these ones if you can help it. Black has access to a couple at common. It's got Scarblade's Malice. Target creature gains Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, you get a 2/2 black and green elf creature token, so that one's pretty good. And then Barbed Bloodletter. So 2 mana, the equipped creature, you can attach it. It's got flash, then you can attach it to the creature when it comes into play. The equipped creature gets +1/+2 and gets Wither. So that just means it deals damage in the form of -1/-1 counter. So even if it doesn't finish off your creature, it's going to really shrink your creature a lot. And it has equipped too, so it's going to be kind of a permanent buff. You don't want to get blown out by these cards, though a lot of the time, like just knowing about them can really go a long way. And those are both commons. And then in green, there's 1 common and 2 uncommons to know about. Guilt Leaf's Embrace is 3 mana, so it's pretty easy to, like, if your opponent's doing suspicious things and has 3 mana, just think Guilt Leaf's Embrace potentially. Flash, enchanted creature, when it enters, gets trample and indestructible until end of turn, and +2/+0. So keep that in mind. And then at uncommon, it's got Blossoming Defense, which is +2/+2 for 1 mana, and Hexproof, and then Thought Weft Charge, which is +3/+3 for 2 mana. And if a creature entered under your control this turn, draw a card. So if your opponent plays their creature before combat, especially if they haven't been doing that before, Thought Weft Charge might come to mind. Next up are some traps to avoid. First up is Crib Swap. 3 mana, you exile target creature, its controller creates a 1/1 shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. You really don't want to be giving your opponents 1/1s, especially in this set where Blight can be used on those 1/1s, especially with Changeling, where having all creature types can be pretty relevant for some of the cards in the set. Convoke makes the 1/1 pretty useful. You pretty much just don't want to be giving your opponent a resource with your removal spell because you want to have the flexibility to use your removal spell on something like a 2/2 flyer, where killing their 2/2 flyer but giving them a 1/1 ground creature, it's a substantial downgrade, but it's not like the end of the world for your opponent. They still get a resource into play. And unless you just don't want to be playing Crib Swap generally. It's just not the card that you're going to be interested in playing as a removal spell. Just avoid these cards to give your opponents generally at least leaving something in play. It's not what you want. Next is Kindle the Inner Flame. 4 mana. It's a kindred sorcery elemental. You create a token that's a copy of target creature you control and except it has haste, and at the beginning of your end step you sacrifice it, and then you can flash this back by beholding 3 elementals and paying 2 mana. Generally, this card only does what you want if you already have like a good thing to copy. It doesn't do anything on defense, so if you're falling behind, this card doesn't do anything. And generally, you just want to have cards that are good on offense or defense, and this one just needs a lot of setup cost, and it's just going to be a card that you're not super happy to be playing in your decks. And finally, there's Spell Snare. This is the sort of card that's like good and constructed, and you might be, oh, it's an uncommon, obviously I want to draft this. You don't really want this card in draft. Decks usually have like maybe 7 or 8 2-drops, but by the time you're like being able to hold up your Spell Snare, you don't often get to counter them. Like, sure, if you're on the draw, you have Spell Snare in your opening hand, and you're like your opponent plays a 2-drop on turn 2, maybe that's like the best case possible. But if you're playing like on the play and you have Spell Snare in your hand, like you still want to play your 2-drop on turn 2, and then you've tapped out, so your opponent plays their 2-drop on turn 2, and then you have Spell Snare. It's like, well, on turn 3 you still want to play your 3-drops. You're not going to like play 2-drop and hold up a mana in case your opponent plays a 2-drop. They're still going to play like their 3-drop, and by the time you have like Spell Snare mana up, it's just not going to do what you want. If you ever top deck it, it's generally pretty useless because in the late game, you don't really care about countering their 2-drops anyway. And overall, Spell Snare is going to be a dead card way more often than it's worth, and not a card you should be playing in draft. Next up are some combos you can assemble. First up is the combo between Vinebred Brawler and Burden Stoneback. So our good friend Burden Stoneback, we already saw that one can give things indestructible. Vinebred Brawler is 2 and a green. It must be blocked if able. It's a 4/2, and when it attacks another target elf you control gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So it has to be blocked. So if you give it indestructible with your Burden Stoneback, all of a sudden your opponent's going to basically have to chump block it with anything, because 4 power is a lot of power, but 2 toughness is not a lot of toughness. So they would generally be able to like put a 2/2 in front of it and trade. But if you give it indestructible, they're going to have to just send their creatures to the sacrificial altar of Vinebred Brawler. So pretty nice card for you there. Combo there. Next is the combo between Gut Splitter Gang and Brambleback Brute, or really any of these cards that remove -1 counters from themselves. So Gut Splitter Gang is a 4 mana 6/6. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may Blight 2. If you don't, you lose 3 life. So kind of big downside to lose 3 life, but you do get a massive creature. So Blight 2, okay, you're putting counters on your creatures. If you have something like Brambleback Brute in play, though, it's a 3 mana 4/5, but it enters with 2 -1 counters on it, and then you can spend 2 and remove a counter to make it so target creature can't block this turn. If you're like if you like are in the late game and you're spending like 4 mana to remove 2 counters from your Brambleback Brute every turn, make it so 2 of your opponent's creatures can't block. That's going to be pretty much unbeatable. And Gutsplitter Gang lets you do that every single turn by just blighting 2, putting the counter. So turning that downside of blight into upside. But there's a lot of those cards that we saw earlier, like the card that lets you remove counters to draw cards, remove counters to give things -2/-2, remove counters to put a creature back from your graveyard into play that's mana value 3 or less. Gutsplitter Gang combos really well with all of those. Next is a combo between Wanderbrine Trapper and Pestered Wellguard. So it's a 1 mana 2/1. You can spend 1 mana and tap another untapped creature you control to tap target creature an opponent controls. So it's a little bit inefficient because you're tapping 2 of your creatures to tap 1 of your opponent's creatures, and you're spending a mana to do it. But if you have something like Pestered Wellguard, when it becomes tapped, you get a 1/1 blue and black creature token with flying. You're pretty happy to tap it as much as possible, and it can't always like tangle in combat because it's just a 3/2. So something like Wanderbrine Trapper lets you get that 3/2 gets you get that 1/1 flyer every single turn. It's a nice little combo to be aware of. Look for ways to tap your creatures without having to actually attack with them. And in a similar vein, Springleaf Drum is one of those ways to tap your creatures without actually tapping them for attacks, and it's a 1 mana artifact. You tap an untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color, as well as tap the Springleaf Drum. Combine that with something like Wanderwine Destructor, which when it becomes tapped, target creature and opponent controls gets -3/-0 until end of turn. That's just super irritating to deal with in combat. It's the fact that they know that at any time one of their creatures could get -3/-0, like it makes it really hard for them to block. So you attack with like 2 creatures, they have like a couple 2/2s. They can't really block, like they don't really want to block because like one of their creatures is going to get -3/-0 and just die in the block. Not going to deal any damage. It's a really irritating combo, so being able to tap it at instant speed with the Springleaf Drum is especially relevant. Next up is the mana fixing you have access to in this set. If you open a multicolored card, or you want to splash, or you're playing a vivid deck with multiple colors, these are the cards you're going to be looking at common. You have Evolving Wilds, which is absolutely fantastic, really good. It doesn't take up a slot in your spells. You just use this instead of a land. It's even solid in a 2-color deck just for fixing your colors there. Foraging Wickermaw can also be a useful tool here. When it enters, you surveil 1, which isn't the end of the world, but it's a 1/3, and then you can filter mana through it. And make it the card any color until end of turn, which is especially relevant for a Vivid deck. You can only do that once per turn. And also, you don't want to rely on this for fixing. Think of this more as a supplemental source of fixing, because you don't want to have your fixing tied to cards that your opponent is going to easily be able to kill, like creatures, or that will trade off in combat. Furdock Core isn't the greatest source of fixing. 3 mana, taps for any color. It can become a 4/4 in the super late game when you have access to that 4 mana. It's a changeling, so it helps you with creature types in some ways, but generally not the best fixing. So only really use this one if you have like a lot of cards that you really want to that you really need to splash and that you really care about that 1 mana of any color. And then Changeling Wayfinder is fantastic. It's a 1/2 changeling, and then you can go basic land and reveal it and put it to your hand. So it's a creature type that matters for a lot of your cards, gets you a basic land, which is a little bit of card advantage. If you trade this off, put blight counters on it, really nice thing. Those are the colorless options. These are the ones that are colored at common. So you get Great Forest Druid. Again, it's a creature, so you can't always rely on it for your fixing, but it does tap for any color. 2 mana 0/4, so relatively hard to kill. Tend of the Sprigs is pretty nice as well. 3 mana for a search for basic land. And if you're searching and you have enough tree folk, if you have 7 or more lands and or tree folk, you get a 3/4 green tree folk creature token with reach, which is pretty nice as well. So your ramp spell that was helping you in the early turns can also get you a nice creature in the mid game. Then you have Stratosaur, which has basic land cycling, and Karath Zealot, which has basic land cycling. So if you're playing a blue or red deck, you have a late game card that can also get you a basic land to fix your mana in the earlier turns. Some final tips. Be conscious of how Blight and Convoke change the importance of creatures for you and your opponent. So if you have a Convoke deck where there's a lot of cards with Convoke, you kind of want to avoid trades, because even your little creatures can be used later on to help you cast your big Convoke spells. Whereas if you know your opponent's playing a Convoke deck, you kind of want to trade your 2/2 for their 2/2 so their Convoke card can't be cast for cheaper. Similarly, if you have Blight cards in your deck and you want to have those -1/-1 counters go on to a specific creature, you kind of want to avoid trading that off. And if you see your opponent has one of those creatures, you kind of want to promote those trades. So creatures have relative value based on what else is in the deck of both your deck and your opponent's deck. So keep an eye out for that so that you can make trades or attack when your opponent might not block with a creature they otherwise would have, just because of the composition of their deck. Next, hybrid mana symbols can be helpful for enabling your Vivid cards. So a card like Gangly Stompling, which isn't that great, it's 3 mana for a 4/2 trample changeling, so it's got a lot of flexible things. The fact that it's got red or green in its mana cost means it counts as both colors for your Vivid card. So if you're playing a blue-green Vivid deck and you have a Gangly Stompling in play, that's going to be 2 different colors. So you have like a blue card in play and a Gangly Stompling in play. That's 3 colors for your Vivid card. So keep these hybrid cards in mind. Even if they look a little bit weak, if they're amplifying all of your other cards that care about Vivid, then they can be worth playing. or of course, if you care about changelings or things like that. And then the final tip is keep an extra card in your hand in the late game to protect yourself against black decks. Dream Seizure is a common in this set. When it enters, you can blight one. If you do, each opponent discards a card. So if you have a really important card in your hand and you don't have a need for the extra lands, just hold that extra land to make sure you don't get wrecked by Dream Seizure if you can avoid it. That's going to do it for this video, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you did make it to the end, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions or feedback. And to let me know you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave hashtag LORWYNNER in the comment section down below, because now you're ready to enter your drafts and win. That's going to do it for this one, though. I'll see you on LORWYN, and I'll talk to you next time.